Cool. Right. Well, thanks for coming and joining me, Gary, on this one.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
It's my pleasure. It's kind of a bit of a, I kind of feel super lucky to obviously get to do this sort of thing with you, because for the last 2 years now, I'd say you've been my kind of probably one of my main teachers as far as all of my movement stuff is concerned. So yeah, getting to chat to you about some of this stuff and hopefully spread it around a little bit will be kind of cool. Now, we've kind of joked just briefly. Normally these things you go, so how did you get into what you do, Gary? How did you suddenly discover and work out how to help people so much? And then you would go,
ski boots.
And we decided that we're just going to skip that whole bit. If you want to learn more about Gary, like how he got into this, there is about 25 or 30 podcasts, something like that, listed on his website, which I'll put in the link, where he explains it all. You can also read all about it in his book, What the Foot. So essentially, no ski boots.
We don't need to talk about that today.
We don't need to talk about it. There's loads of information about that everywhere else.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And hopefully for all of the other AIM people who might listen to this, you don't need to listen to it all again.
You don't have to hear it either.
You don't have to hear it again. So yeah, I think essentially I kind of wanted to hopefully come at some of the bits and pieces of how I've used my knowledge of anatomy and motion and your flow motion model with my client base, which primarily is obviously yoga people. But obviously I want to talk about a whole bunch of, sports, because I work with a lot of athletes as well. And then general, wellness of the body, perhaps, maybe slightly philosophical about some things, but just how a well moving structure within, let's say, your parameters of what you think or what you've shown in my eyes is a well moving structure, how that translates into hopefully less pain, more effortless movement and things.
Cool.
So,
but also more systemic health, right?
Exactly.
As part of your interest, yeah.
Absolutely. So from my perspective as a nurse, I always felt that better movement meant not only better like physical like movement, but it also means so much more, as well as lymph movement and blood movement through the body and everything. So can you kind of perhaps just give a brief overview of like just the flow motion model without having to go into ski boots and whatnot, but what does the flow motion model that you've I don't know, created, is that the right word? I guess
uncovered is a word.
Uncovered, yeah. I was going to say discovered, but uncovered. We'll go with uncovered.
Blew the dust off. Primarily, it was an observation of human movement, which was refined into an observation of the walking gait cycle. So the model itself is a description of the journey of every bone in all three dimensions through a single footstep to a whole stride. So how you get from your left heel through a footstep, through the next footstep and back to your left heel. That would determine the cycle. The cycle from a strike phase to a foot being flat to the foot toeing off again, including the weight transfer from your left leg to your right leg, and how it swings through the air and then back onto the ground. It was a pure fascination, really, to start with. I didn't have any clue that it would lead to what it has led to, but if you are accurately able to determine the journey of every single bone, then you're able to put the bone in front and the bone behind together and recognize that there's a relationship in the movement that is taking place between those joints, and those joints are the space between the joints between the bones is what we call a joint. That's what I'm getting to. And so we're actually able to then determine the required joint motion for a healthy gait cycle at every level, from the big toe through to the ankle, up to the hips, through the spine, out to the hands, arms, fingers, and not forgetting shoulder girdle and skull. So it literally is the movement of every bone and every joint in 3 dimensions. And a single footstep we know takes about 0.8 seconds. And we also know that every single one of those bones and joints will travel to both ends of their range in all 3 dimensions in that period of time, which is absolutely mind-blowing and not something that anybody really thinks about too often. But you know, and then we would used to say to people on a course, you know, what are you here for? What are your expectations? People said, I really want to get good at watching somebody walk. And you're looking to see 206 bones move in both directions through 3 dimensions in a period of 0.8 seconds. Good luck with that. You're going to need a bit more. So you need a way of assessing that and looking at that. But in a slightly further step forward from that, what you begin to realize is that your strike phase, the moment you put the heel on the ground, there is actually an optimal way of doing it. It's the most efficient and effective way of doing it, and anything else is just more effort and less efficiency put into the system. And then, so if you enter into your strike phase in a slightly compromised way or less than ideal way, then you're going to roll into your next part of the walking phase already playing catch up. And then if you don't succeed that one very well, then the next one will be compromised. And then we start to see the human walk. Then we have people who favor left side versus right side. And now they don't use their left leg very well. They overuse the right leg. And we start to see it all come out. So that strike phase, that optimal place, the position that I describe, is in essence, it's a whole body snapshot. It's not just about putting the heel on the ground when you walk. So can your body access that position? And then when you get to put your other heel on the ground, let's say that was the left one, now we're going to put the right one on the ground. Are you able to access that perfectly as well? And if you are, that means that you can actually create the same shape on both sides of your body. And that's actually an unusual experience for people, because they are favoring one side. They are dominant on one side through whether it's handedness or through injury and adaptation, etc. And the recognition is actually that if we can access the movement on our left side and equally access the movement on the right side, then in order to find ourselves in an optimal position to be able to do that, we would have to stand upright, nice and clean. I don't want a pelvis that's more left than it is right. I don't want a side bend in my spine. I don't want one foot to be flatter than the other, because that immediately compromises my ability to either do it on the left side or the right side. And that's where we start to see imbalances. And imbalances in people's mind would be posture, imbalanced posture, forward head, leaning to the right. It would be muscle length, tension relationships in the system, compression of joints, excessive tension in muscle systems, etc. And those areas of compression or areas of increased tension or areas that move too much or areas that move too little simply stimulate the nervous system to create, possibly and not always, the idea of discomfort or pain as a messenger. And so we reflect that messenger back out to be, hey, I've got some discomfort here. And quite frankly, what I'm trying to tell you is something isn't right. I'm not necessarily saying rub me, the sore bit, but I want you to know that something isn't right with the way I am doing X or this movement or how I'm standing. And that leads us into our investigation. And where somebody might have an area of discomfort, we realize that may not also be the area of work. The area of work comes back to the model, which is, is your pelvis, for instance, or let's say spine, is your spine actually capable of flexing and extending? Is your spine capable of side bending left, side bending right? Is your spine capable of rotating left, rotating right, equally, with equal measure towards both sides? Because if it isn't, we're going to see that imbalance, and we're going to be able to begin to see where the areas of compression are, where the areas of tension are, where the areas of too much movement, too little movement, where all of that resides, and be able to create a rational reason as to why they might have their discomfort. And that's where the work kind of starts to unfold itself. Yeah. So from the pure fascination of questioning, what does a foot do through the walking cycle, to be able to eventually say, well, that foot is now causing your left shoulder pain. That's kind of been the joy of the journey.
One of the things I've been finding recently, because I'm currently doing my PT training as well, is how much it's thought, or it's repeated, I guess, over and over again, that those imbalances are just tough shit. That's you. Your pelvis stays over there, or your feet are, one's turned out more than the other, or they're both turning. Well, that's you. So how can we then work around that type thing? And the more I, with some of the the work with some of the athletes I get to see and whatever else, it's kind of like, well, this is your structure, that's stuck,
deal with
that's fixed. So how can we then give you the best flexibility, which is what quite often what ends up coming to me is like, oh, well, you're a yoga teacher, can you make him more flexible? His his pelvis is a bit hiked on the right side, and his feet are turned out, but can you make him more flexible because he's got some back pain? And I then have a look and use, I do use elements of all the yoga and stuff as well, but using the understanding of the flow motion model to kind of go, well, you broke your hand. And I wasn't told about that, but they kind of go, well, I broke my hand. And then I kind of follow it through and say, just a football I had today, I just got him to essentially just move his hand in a slightly different direction, and his whole foot, which was stuck, wasn't moving, just dropped moving to the floor, and his eyes just lit up, and it's just
and it's quite an unbelievable experience, and it's almost unbelievable to listen to. It becomes believable when you have the experience like the guy did, or when you see it like you did, and so to talk about it is all we can do is invite people into the possibility that it can happen. But I think the most important part of that is to recognize that there's a relationship between how you move your wrist and the rest of the body.
Absolutely.
Which is that, you again, he may have not had wrist pain, but the fact that he broke it, questionable recovery around it, which we can touch on if you want.
But definitely.
If you put a wrist flexion in, then we'll know that there's moments in the cycle where the wrist is required to flex, and then when the wrist is flexing, you're questioning, what would the elbow be doing, what would the shoulder be doing, what input would that have on the scapula, and how would the rib cage be responding at that moment in time, and then the limitations. If you can flex freely on the left, as you flex your left wrist, all those movements are possible. If you can't flex your right wrist, all of those particularly off a list, all of those limitations on that side are then blocked. So now you have imbalance. You have let's say I can flex my wrist, extend my shoulder, I can rotate left, but I can't flex this one, so I actually struggle to rotate left. I end up over rotating left. Counter rotation with the pelvis. Now I end up with one leg forward, the other leg can't get forward. This left foot pronates more, the right foot struggles to pronate, and all of a sudden the whole system has unfolded. But the weird bit is the permission. I do this, and the brain goes, oh, all of a sudden I can rotate right better, I can rotate my pelvis left better, I can pronate my right foot better. And that's it's a big leap if you say, hey, I just flexed someone's wrist and his foot started pronating, and then Twitter, no chance. Well, that's a big leap. But point being, Wib, is if you can do a step-by-step, joint by joint by joint explanation to see if it makes sense, that's the difference. And I think that's what the model really gives us.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's just when I remember, we all say it when we come and do the course, it's just that first 6-day course is just head blown off. You can't quite.
And we try to be gentle.
And the thing is, the funny thing is, there's nothing crazy about it though. It's just like you kind of say in the book and stuff. It's just another side of the coin. It's just just looking the fact that structure isn't fixed, and that actually one joint will interact with another, and especially if you've got 33 joints in such a small space of the foot. I'll go on here, but like in case I put this up, such a small space for so many joints. Getting to
your second cuneiform's upside down. That
I know, it's just
come on, sorting out.
It's been in the cupboard for all of lockdown. But and I said to this lad, he's like, how did that happen? What happened? I said, and this is one of the things I love about the model and about the bits that you obviously did, and I've kind of posted it to death of late, but you've posted some videos about the cogs and essentially how the whole body works almost as a cog system of, as this one gets flexed, this one's going to extend, you know, and you can see how the knock-on effect of one thing going is going to suddenly spiral into,
yeah,
you know, affecting your opposite big toe. And, you know, it's all the rage these days to talk about, you know, everything's connected. But I think until this model, outside of just saying, well, you know, fascia connects everything, which obviously it does, you know, actual more solid hands-on what we can see and do, this model is probably the first thing I think that shows everyone how it works.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I wanted to say that it's the model itself is not a leap of faith either. It's actually determined through the observation of joint surfaces. So we're not making up what a joint can do. We're actually looking at what physically all it can do, what it can do, but all it can do. It can't do any more, it can't do any less, it can't go in this direction or that direction. It has to do that, and it has to articulate in this way with that structure. The next question was when. So, well, it articulates in this way in a flexion. Say we're thinking about the knee, when the foot is pronating, it extends and straightens when the foot is supinating. So when does the foot pronate? Well, when you put it forward and it's on the ground. And when does it supinate? Is every moment after that, as we propel ourselves forward and change our weight. So all the such things, like just from that conversation, if I can't supinate the foot, there's a good possibility that I won't be able to get my weight over onto my left hand side. Now I live in my right leg and it hurts, my ankle's tired, my hip's tired, my knee's tired, my low back started to ache. And the reason they did it is because they broke their left ankle or twisted their left ankle and took their weight off it consciously and changed their gait forever. So the pain is absolutely nothing to do with the pain spots. It's all to do with the choice they made around the ankle.
So there's a couple of bits on that then. One would be, as you said, the dubious rehab around bits.
Say the wrist, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing it's very big in the yoga world these days. I don't know if you've ever heard of Paul Grilly. He was like a yin yoga guy, but he did a lot of research around bones and, you know, and structure being a limiting factor to your yoga practice type thing. Now, it gets thrown around a lot that, you know, well, your femoral head is at 17 degrees and yours is at 50 degrees, and so therefore you can't do this and do that. With that and the model, obviously the problem is that's in a yoga perspective, again, not in like necessarily a walking human gait perspective. But have you ever come across, you know, obviously there's always human variance of some people can't do something, but on a mass scale, and you've probably seen more people than most, you know, for the most part, human variation isn't, with joint structures and joint surfaces, is never so greatly different that you can't make that the flow motion model still doesn't work.
Well, I think I was at odds with a lot of what you just said a long time ago. So it's not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. People, you know, different sized pelvises, different depths of hip sockets, acetabulums, different shaped femoral heads. I mean, as you start to get into like a Perthes disease conversation where the femoral head is actually more like a cube than it is round, that's definitely a problem.
Yeah.
If the ball and the socket functions and there's a shallow socket or a deep socket, the thing to recognize is that there's still 6 degrees of freedom, and it's still like they said we can circumduct our arm, we can circumduct our hip. We'll break that down into, that's a sagittal plane, a frontal plane, and a transverse plane, and combinations of all three. But the hip, if it's a ball and socket conversation, does it really matter what depth there is in the acetabulum or how, as long as it connects in there is still a requirement for it to be able to flex well, extend well, adduct well, abduct well, externally rotate well, and internally rotate well. And that those 6 movements are required to have that effective walk cycle. Now, it's not just about the hip, because there's a relationship between that hip and the pelvis movement, obviously, because it's so closely connected. And healthy pelvises with normal I shouldn't say healthy, I probably shouldn't even say normal, but what we perceive to be the normal depth and hip socket, you know, the good one that doesn't affect your yoga, for instance, those people still struggle to both flex and extend, adduct and abduct, and internally and externally rotate. So I don't see what the difference is. The other thing that it brings me onto is this idea of center. So if we shouldn't live in a boo-hoo, poor me space if my acetabulum is a little bit shallower than yours, because that is me.
Yeah.
And that being me is my movement potential, is my movement potential. If I live in a boo-hoo space, I put myself in a chair, cry myself to sleep and don't do anything about it. Whereas what I could be doing is sitting up and saying, right, well, I need this hip to flex, I need it to extend, I need to adduct, I need to abduct, I need to internally rotate, I need to externally rotate. And when I do that, I need my pelvis to do A, B, C, D. I need my femur to do D, E, F, and G, and I need my foot to do X, Y, and Z. And that's what we start to understand about the model. The more I explore my own movement, regardless of my limitations, the more I will uncover the things I can do and the things I can't do. And when I start putting the things I can't do back into my body, that's when good things start to happen. So most people, if they have any level of compromise in their system, are exacerbating that compromise by not doing the right things. And as soon as they do, they can start to take off the layers of compensation and live a more effective and efficient movement life.
And I guess, like, jumping on that is the idea that, especially in the yoga world, obviously, what is considered to be like good range or good ranges of motion, let's say, is obviously like weird, like not natural kind of range of motion. You know, I mean, I haven't done it for a long time, but I used to be able to sit there with both my legs behind my head. Now, most people would look at me and go, "Oh my God, you're so like, flexible. You know, how you're so flexible and you can do anything. Your body's incredible." And then I came on course and I realized that both my feet were knackered, like my hip neither like flexed or extended. Like I couldn't adduct my right hip.
Just to add, this was self-realization, not us telling
you. Yeah. Just
yeah.
No, you just go, no, like try and move like this. Oh no, shit, I can't do that. What about that? No, not that either. Oh my God, yeah. Why? You know, and people always say to me, but you move so well, like you can do so much, you can't have any pain, you can't have any, but you know, from my perspective, what good movement is and what like big movement is obviously very different.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess in and around those hips that you were talking, again, I'm going to just keep going on the yoga bash in the yoga world, I guess. But the
you can do that because you're part of the yoga world, right?
Yeah, totally,
that's
exactly.
Something I would like to do.
But again, the idea around that hip movement, what is a good hip movement, and going into a hip, actually extending a hip, because this was one of the best things I've kind of discovered with you and putting it into my own classes and when I teach and things is you know, big and sexy is the best thing on Instagram. And I've had people kind of, you know, trot me doing a big back bend, almost getting my head down to my foot, which I'm lunging away from. And you know, everyone's like, "Oh my God, you've got like amazing open hips." And then when you again look at joint surfaces and joint structures, there is no hip extension. So like, can you just perhaps try and break down the idea of like what a hip extension is, and all those people who are, you know, going out foam rolling and stretching the hell out of their psoas because they've been told they're sitting in a chair for too many hours a day, how they're actually just kind of missing the point.
It's an interesting one. So if we are thinking yoga and we just think of any kind of warrior pose with a leg forward and a leg back, what you're likely to see is that if you look at the pelvis and make a relationship between the pelvis and the angle of the femur, you tend to end up in this kind of like T position. So there's a leg behind and the pelvis is facing down here like this, with the body then stood up on top of it. So you have all the movement taking place in the lumbar spine. There's an excess amount of extension in order to stand up. And the pelvis is actually tilted forward. And the difference between, if a pelvis stands like this, you would say that that's a neutral hip. If then you've got the leg behind you and the pelvis is tilted forward like this, it's still a neutral hip. So just having the leg behind you does not mean that it's in a position of extension. If the lumbar spine is compensating for the lack of extension in the hip by increasing the extension in the lumbar. That's why a lot of people end up with lumbar back pain, because they struggle to extend those hips. And so you just talked about big and sexy, but actually movement, human movement, is really, really small. And I think you and I have had this conversation before, but the movement, the amount of movement in a pronation is tiny. The amount of movement in a spinal extension is tiny, joint per joint, but looks bigger as you add more and more joints in. And there's almost like a mathematical reasoning around, if every single joint in the body is moving optimally and equally, then there are very few shapes that you can create in your body, and they look like they're the ones that we would adopt when we're walking.
Yeah.
In order to make other shapes happen, the only way to do it is to increase movement somewhere and reduce movement somewhere else. So any posture or any limp or any balletic or yoga move will be made up of joints that are moving too much and joints that are moving too little. And that's not a problem if we can tolerate it. It's when we can't tolerate it that it becomes a problem. So that's, walking is the most boring sport in the world, probably. So we would like to be able to access the things like dance and ballet and different sports, being able to jump in different sports and throw a javelin and hit a cricket ball, hit a golf ball, whatever else. But the best place to set yourself up for that array of big movement is still to be able to be centered in yourself. And like you're noticing, the majority of athletes that we get to work with are not that. So they're always starting off on the back foot, if you like, and having to work against that. And our goal is simply to promote a way where people can center themselves through having even movement in both directions. I mean, I don't think it's rocket science. Can you get your pelvis left and right equally? Right? Can we just do that for a bit? Can you tilt your pelvis into anterior and posterior without any discomfort? If you do these human movements and you find that you have discomfort, or it's easier one way than the other, there's something to work on. There's something to do. But what you're doing is you're speaking to the brain, the nervous system's appreciation of balance, which is to not be as too far left and a little bit right, but to have equal access both ways. And for the brain to reorganize itself in a way that takes the pressure off the system, but also creates a base for us to move forward and thrive, I guess, on the sports field or in our moves, or do our big balletic move and be okay with it. And I think the problem that you might be bumping into is that if you go to a class every week and do a warrior with no hip extension and excessive lumbar load, you might get strong there, but it's not really going to carry over into your healthy movement life going forward. And that's where I think you start to bump into things like that.
I always remember, I think it might have even been before I remember bumping into you before the first day of our first workshop I did with you, and you were sitting in Starbucks or something, like having your coffee on your computer,
probably guilty,
bent over, kind of tapping away, and then kind of, whether it be whatever, I'm going to bring it back to sitting and the idea of there being a good and bad way of doing anything. And you kind of said on one of the first days you were like, I sit there and I'm slouched over while I'm on my computer, but I give my body the experience of having the opposite of it throughout the day other times. So there's nothing wrong with being in a shape, as long as your body can know that it can still do the opposite experience. And I had a ballet teacher on Instagram chatting to me the other day, and she was saying about how after I posted something, she was like, oh my God, I think it was about breathing and kind of cogs. And she said, well, I'm never going to put anyone in this kind of, I don't know what they call corset thing again. I don't know, because it's going to restrict their movement. And I was kind of like, well, if you need it for the dance, there's nothing wrong with it. Just make sure that the other 23 hours of the day, they're kind of
just don't do ballet all day. Go back to being a human. And it's an interesting one. The line that I use often is the line, one choice is no choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you end up, if I mean, you've been in a classroom kind of differently, but if you sit, you've posterior tilted pelvis, flex spine, forward head, and then you sleep like that, you get up and you go for a pee like that, then you sit down and have your breakfast like that, you jump in the car and you drive to work like that, they sit at the office all day, and you sit like that, then you go for a pee like that, and then you eat your lunch like that, you sit back at the office like that, you get back in the car like that, and then you go home and you play with the kids like that. One choice is no choice. Eventually that is going to pop up and bite you on the ass, and it will show for it. So that what you need to be doing, well, you don't need to be doing, if you would like to, you have a choice, as do we all, but not realizing you have a choice is also one choice, and it's the no choice that everybody opts for. But it's a very simple process of to give yourself a movement experience and your spine works in 6 different ways. I've said it earlier. Can we extend? Can we flex? Can we side bend left? Can we side bend right? Rotate left. And can your head do what it needs to do, and can your pelvis do what it needs to do? The bigger you go, the more complex it sounds, but they're really easy flowing movements that will give you half a chance here and change the way that you sleep in your bed, change the way you stand at the toilets, change the way you drive your car, change and your attitude to how long are you prepared to sit in that position at work without getting up, articulating in such and such a way, and moving forward. So I do think that's a big part of it. And then
really just go on.
Injuries is the same thing. So if we mentioned earlier, some guy's done his ankle on his left, or even the guy with the wrist, he's now stuck on his right leg because he doesn't want to put his weight on his left leg, or with the wrist he's stuck on his left leg because he can't put his weight on his right leg because the wrist's not giving him permission to do so. He ends up locked in his one choice that he doesn't realize he has another choice, so he's got no choice. And then training every day, working hard every day, looking to play, competing, and it's going to get you in the end.
And then again that comes down to that I've forgotten what I was going to say on that, but it doesn't matter.
That's normally what I do.
Right. Which I guess then, with all of that kind of takes us through, briefly, but exactly what you were saying, can you do this, and this? This is why I kind of recommend to all of my clients who come to see me, they try and pick up your, wake up your body, wake up your feet programs before they even come and see me, which, you would think it does me out of a job, but it really doesn't, because they just understand their movement. So the wake up your body, wake up your feet is basically a little program Gary's put together, which I'll put the link in. Again, you kind of discussed that in a lot of the other podcasts, but do you want to give it a quick overview and then?
Yeah, absolutely. So the intention behind Wake Your Body Up was initially it was to satisfy a waiting list of God knows how long from the being on the TV for 5 minutes, and we needed a way to give people access to the work because we physically couldn't see them personally. But what it did do, it ticks this idea of me giving people the possibility of taking ownership of their own body, which basically means taking ownership of their own health and well-being, and rather than putting out to another practitioner to fix them, we want them to come, like you just said, to understand the work better, to understand the movements better, to have a sense of what they're going to do when they meet one of the professionals who have done an AIM course, and then create a team with the therapist to work on their problems. Takes the pressure off the therapist, who now knows that he's not the person in charge of the fix, but the patient or client is the person who's going to be responsible ultimately for doing it. And the program is very simple. You're going to look see where the weight pressure is in your feet. And if the pressure in your feet is not where it should be, you're going to have an imbalance in your body. Can we track that up and start to see how that imbalance in your body shows? Where's your pelvis in space? What's your posture? How's your spine sitting? How's your skull sitting? And then how can you move them? So like we said earlier, can you move your pelvis left? Can you move your pelvis right? Can you hike it on the left? Can you hike it on the right? Document all the way through and end up with a list. I can't do this. Do any of those things correlate with an injury history? And it's a lovely process for them all to walk through. And it's quite long. It's split into 2 parts. I think it's about 3 hours in total. And at the end, these are the things that if you found they were beneficial, you're going to focus on those. And Wake Your Feet Up was similar. So I don't think personally that there's many people out there who are giving you insight into how your foot performs, the shape that it should be, the shape that it is, and how to get 26 bones and 33 joints moving without using some external devices or locking you up into orthotics for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so it gives people a real opportunity, if they've got any foot or knee discomfort, to start mobilizing these bones, which mobilizes the tissues, which has a feedback up. If you think about the wrist story, if I can give permission to anybody to move their feet better, it's going to have that knock-on effect up the body. And so that's the idea. And I wanted them to be accessible, both time-wise and money-wise, and also to recognize that, you know, we're not growing any more bones or there's nothing to add to this or take away from it anymore. This is a lifelong tool for people that, you know, if they get benefit from it now and then they get some discomfort in their shoulder in 3 years' time, pull it out again, because this is the same process. If you come to see me today, I'll be running the same process in 10 years' time. There's nothing to add to it. It's completely like locked up based on the map that we've created. So just so to underline, it really helps people to understand where they're at, hopefully shed some light on why they're feeling pain, where they're feeling pain. And 3, gives them some light at the end of the tunnel with things that they can do. And it all can be done, especially through the last year. People have been able to enjoy doing it in the comfort of their own home when they knew they were in discomfort and they couldn't make their way out to find a physiotherapist or something like that. And then, of course, like you say, on the back of that, if they then come to you, they're not weirded out by this put your arm in the air and twist your pelvis right and bend your left knee kind of scenario.
And they kind of already understand some of the terms as well.
Yeah.
So with on that, I guess, around pain, just briefly, but now I know, obviously, I've worked through basically the entirety of the online material that we have and stuff, and heard some stories, but like in and around pain, you know, it's one of those things. I always remember this story of someone with knee pain, I think, and they were a total mess, and then, you know, they couldn't walk anywhere or something, and then all of a sudden you had done some work with them. I can't remember if it's just the online stuff and replying or whether it was actually seeing you in person, but they always had the knee pain, and then, you know, they all of a sudden were like climbing up, I don't know, the mountains, and they said, "Oh, how'd you getting on then?" You know, and he's, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this, but the knee pain's still there, still got that bit of knee pain." And I just can always remember you saying it'll be there until it's not. Like, you just won't notice it one day. And you know, from my perspective of getting into this whole thing was, you know, my dad is a mess, like constant chronic pain from botched surgeries and all sorts. But like, it's one of those things of people see pain and they almost can't let it go. But actually, you know, how from, I guess this goes back to where we almost started with, like, the better body movement feeding into a healthier, like, whole system. And pain being, like, as you said, a messenger essentially saying something's wrong, can you know, sort this out? And then, you know, so diving just a little bit more into that, and, you know, understanding perhaps pain and movement, and obviously we know they're perhaps related, but I think there's a lot of people don't quite understand how much an overly pronated or everted foot might affect pain somewhere that they're not. I know you've kind of touched on it briefly, but like, I think
there's a whole realm of pain science, and as a result of pain being an uncomfortable thing and something we try to understand, we end up with a whole kind of science around it. And I've always just tried to take it really simple. And I don't think that the term managing our pain is a useful term for people to live by, because I'm pretty sure that whenever I've come across it's a messenger or a guide or an informant of the fact that something's going wrong, like we touched on earlier. And to trust that something might be wrong, rather than get sucked into the area of pain, is a very difficult request. And so people, you know, they still go to the therapist because they're in pain and they would like some resolution. But the less and less we look at their physical structure for that solution, and the more and more we try to come up with some kind of management or mental approach to it, the less justice we actually do to the person. This is my personal take on it, and the pain scientists would bash me for this. But a lot of them don't have access to a model that gives them insight into how the person is using the body, or abusing the body, or disusing the body in a way that actually is contributing to that discomfort. And also in recognition that we have all lived a life of Riley, quite frankly, and I'm no different. The number of my injury list is extensive, and have been working through these injuries for the last 15 years. Yeah, even longer, but with a real conscious insight for the last 15 years. And I'm very much aware of how every single injury has affected me. Injuries that felt important no longer play a part in my body anymore, and other ones still remain, like a fractured jaw will continually, it never reset the same. So it's always going to be something that I manage and work with. Cartilage meniscal removal from a left knee is always going to show itself and affect things, and 13 ankle sprains. So those three seem to be the ones, on a dislocated shoulder. So I've got these 4 things that I carry, and I'm able to work with and understand. The more I understand them, the less problems I have. And I should say that 15 years ago, in 2006, when prior to that I was entering ski competitions and being, in what you might consider one's prime, I'm so far ahead of that now, physically and mentally and emotionally, so far ahead of where I was 15 years ago by virtue of having used the mechanics. There was no talking to me that would have got me out of my discomforts. There was no even treatments were able to get me out of my discomforts. Absolutely nothing. The surgery was a repair. It wasn't as a result of it was a result of an accident, not a what do you call it? We don't know what's wrong with you, we'll just tidy it up. It was actually pretty damaged. So the point being that further down the line, none of the conventional treatments didn't do anything. So it was only when I started putting A and B and C together and going, well, this needs to move. And I almost gave up on the discomforts and just started on moving the body. And then all of a sudden things got easier. And the better things got, the more I cleared up the problems, the louder shouted the areas that were actually a real problem, the knee and the etc. And so eventually we had no option but to deal with those. And so it's a process, and it should be a process. You spent, if you're 30 years old, you spent 30 years getting yourself into this mess. Now you go, hopefully it won't take 30 years hopefully it won't take that long, but with more insight, you give yourself more possibility. And I do feel like often a lot of people, it's not even a feel like, the messages that we get from people who feel left in the gutter, abandoned, unable to be helped, tried this, tried that, lost, don't know, is off the charts, really. And we know that many of them have been able to help themselves, stood in their own living room doing a wake your body up process, because they simply put the medium of movement back into their system and started challenging things that they'd forgot about moving many moons ago.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, most powerful things of all of the anatomy motion stuff I've really come across, just in the sagittal plane, like the side on, in case you're not sure what that means, getting the head, the ribs and the pelvis to articulate with each other. And
even just to stack up on top of each other,
just to stack up. But having back pain is one of the reasons I left nursing. But I was working in A&E, repeatedly having non-specific low back pain coming into A&E, sometimes on a stretcher, and they kind of wanting scans and drugs and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, this is barking, like this is like you know,
how did you get here?
You need to move, you need to move it, and noticing, and I do a lot of breath work these days, as some people know, but like the ability to, expand a chest properly and actually get some some anterior posterior tilt of the rib cage, and you just suddenly how much movement there is in the whole of the muscles in the back, and you think how much then that overly stretched muscle, it gets like a chance to contract back, and then all of a sudden
I was actually, because we were filming yesterday to get our upper body program up and ready. I don't know how many hours it was of filming to talk about the rectus abdominis, external oblique, internal oblique, quadratus lumborum, lats, erector spinae, multifidus. I think that was it. Hours and hours and hours of filming to be able to discuss each one of those muscles. And what I really want to say is, look, they all attach to your rib cage and your pelvis. If you can articulate your rib cage and your pelvis well in 3 dimensions, every single one of those muscles is asked to do its job. Not some working harder than others because of a lack of movement in the spine or a lack of movement in the rib cage or a forward head that's holding it back. And that's where the skeleton becomes so valuable. There's 13 muscles, I think, attached to the knee. That's the number I have in my head. I'll have to judge that. I've got some doubt there, but there's a large number of, number of muscles that attach to the knee. But the knee moves in 4 ways, and if it can do those 4 things, then every muscle will have it. It's the same with the foot. So many muscles, but if you can just get it to pronate and supinate, they all do its thing. But and that's so the joints act, muscles react is a really key part here. There's no, I think we do go back to the start of the podcast here. There's no stretching or strengthening in my programs. There's no stretch this, strengthen that, and everything will be okay, because we know that that does not realign and reset the joint. The realignment and the reset of the joint is by having them all articulate together in that mathematical way where they move together, not one more than another. And that brings all the muscles into play. At the end of the day, if all muscles can pull evenly and push evenly, you're going to end up with a balanced system. And if all joints can stack up, move evenly, not one more than any other, you're going to end up with a balanced system. And in a balanced system, you have ultimate flow. You have no blockages, no limitations, no nothing.
That is of everything, isn't it?
That can hold you back. That's what your blood flow, arterial flow, lymphatic flow, nerve slides, breath in, breath out, digestive organs pumping, you name it. You have an opportunity with good movement to really kick into your whole systemic system. Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. I think we're kind of pushing on for the hour now, but still I've got a couple of bits I wanted to I guess going back to, I wasn't going to go back to a knee, just because we talked about a knee a minute ago and having so many bloody bits attached to it. Now, sometimes you've got to have surgery, and whether it be, I'm going to say a knee or an ankle, because they're 2 things which loads of ankle sprains sometimes need, you might need a tighten up of the ATFL or whatever it might be, a reattachment. But scar tissue then tends to be something which people, I want to say it's scared of, but essentially they kind of go, you've got this scar tissue, like kind of tough shit, like, and so often, and one of the best things I love about this work is actually just watching scars just change again with good, effective, efficient movement. But yeah, so often scars are just something where people kind of end up going, and or like even appendix and stuff like that. I mean, that's me, 100%. And I know it's still, this is something I know is going on in my system still, and I'm playing with. But yeah, obviously when I came to see and work with you guys, and it was just kind of like, put your finger in it. What happens if you do that? Can you move better? Can you kind of just, that probably makes sense to anyone. Yeah, but kind of just break down some scars a little bit. Well, not necessarily explain it, but just around the whole, scars not necessarily being the end of your world as far as a limiting movement factor or. Yeah, I was going to say explanation is not something I can do, but I will. Before I go into this, I'll give a nod to David Weinstock of NKT, or neurokinetic therapy, who's the first person who introduced the idea of a scar's role in inhibiting, not a nervous system, inhibiting areas of the body that it's involved in. So there seems to be this idea. In fact, I literally had someone on Zoom this morning, and he has a scar down the back of his right lateral ankle bone. He'd also had a sprained ankle, and we'd done some work on the sprained ankle, but I'd not seen him up close and personal. So this morning on Zoom, he told me that there was a scar there, and that the tightness of the scar actually meant that the fibula was unable to slide into the space behind it, where all the tightness of the fascial, which is basically regrowth and rebuild to heal the wound of the scar. And so it was blocking his movement of his ankle completely. And we have before and after videos of his spinal movement, which was part of the process. And he has a hip issue on the same side. And so I got him basically to sit down and put his fingers on the scar, just to cover the scar, just like this. And his foot movement was incredible. Like suddenly he was able to keep the lateral border of the foot on the ground. It wasn't rolling off the ground. You could see articulation through the lateral border. And when we stood him up and had him rotate towards it to supinate, he was able to externally rotate his ankle for the first time and see it. So he'd created space just by working with the scar. So it was just a matter of almost massaging it and then kind of picking it up and mobilizing it, and all of a sudden his bone would kind of move into the space. If you think about your appendix, so it's kind of on that low right abdomen, and then all the tissue that if you just rotate your body left, you're going to want all of that tissue to lengthen, but there's a big scar cut right through it. So it will be an inhibitor to that. But as soon as you put your hand on there, all of a sudden you can rotate left, you can lift up. So it gives permission for the fascia around it, or the tissue around it, to actually allow the movement in the bones. But then I've seen weird things where somebody's had a cracked skull and got a scar this big, so tiny, on the back of the head, can't move in any of these checks, put the finger on the scar, and all of a sudden they're booming around with movement. So can I explain it? Absolutely not.
No.
Is it a thing? Yes. And is always something that I'd be mindful of just testing, really. That's a test. If they do this and they still can't do any of their movement, then it's not a factor. But if they put it on and all of a sudden they've got permission to do this crazy amount of movement, you go, well, we should have a look at that. And so it's shown itself lots and lots and lots of times, obviously, but not just from surgeries either. It doesn't have to be a surgical scar, but cuts and all kind of stuff. So park it in my head as something that's holding you back, as an obstacle that's allowing movement. So the more obstacles and limitations and handbrakes on the system and whatever's holding you back, so we can alleviate you of, the more free you will be to move your body. And the brain, there's big rule number 5 in my book, What the Foot, is that the brain is hardwired for that perfection. So as soon as you give permission, once you've played with that scar and introduced the movement, the brain is going to go, do you know what? Next time I need to side bend left, I'm going to just go to those muscles on the left and go to the bones and allow that movement, instead of trying to activate through a head scar or an ankle scar or an appendix scar. And so it gets easier over time, and you're hardwired to move towards the benefit, not away from it. Now, some people have definitely bumped into the benefit and gone, that's not for me. Being centered is more painful than not, and that's just a longer journey probably to undertake.
It's probably just not yet, isn't it?
Not yet is a nice way of putting it. Yeah,
there's probably other things in the way.
Yeah. So, but I think it's everybody. It's they're in your 30 years of disuse that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some scars are not your own fault, but they're still part of our life tapestry, and we should pay attention to them.
Definitely. Cool. Well, I did actually want to touch on, I guess, a bit more about yoga and movement, but we might have bashed yoga enough. I don't know. I was just
I just say, so I don't want to be part of a yoga bashing. When I was a skier, And I don't know if I've told this story before on a podcast, but I remember at the end of one season, like everybody left at the end of a season, but we still stayed out there working in the office and doing orders for the next season stuff. And I would just be in bits, like backache and neck ache and whatever. And I remember walking home one day, and I got back to the little lodge that we stayed in, and all of a sudden I saw this yoga video on the side of the TV, like somebody had put it there, because I'm sure it hadn't been there all season. And I had a kind of quick look around, like I'd never done any yoga or seen any yoga, so I was kind of a bit embarrassed, like even to do it with nobody watching. And put this, it was actually a video, this is how old it was.
VHS.
In, pressed play, and stepped back away from the machine and started doing like a sun salutation for the first time. And I remember feeling amazing. And then so went home for lunch every day and did it. Later that summer, I was invited to a whole, I think it was Danny Paradise, you've probably heard of. Yeah. By absolute accident, ended up doing 9 days of yoga with Danny Paradise in Oxford in England. And I remember I could suddenly move like I'd never moved before. Things that I wanted to achieve, touch my toes. And so I've always said that yoga was a massive, change in direction for me and my body. So I mean, I don't want to bash it at all.
I don't want to bash it either. Like,
it's a big part of you. You have it in your Instagram tag.
Yeah, exactly. It is literally like been a huge part, and putting me back together as well, because I was definitely like, I look at my dad and how much of a mess he is, and always being like, I don't want to be like that. And then like yoga was definitely, again, mine was snowboarding, like just dislocating shoulders and wrist and head injury, banging my head, but going into a yoga studio and just doing those sun sales, is massive. And I kind of, in some ways, I kind of feel that. I remember Chris, obviously, who works with you, and he said to me when I went to see him once, he said about the work we were doing on my chest, it was like just one rib, which is slightly more kind of extended than the rest. And he said, work on your body is like excavating like an old temple. And when you first get there, you use the big machinery, you get the diggers and the bulldozers, and you shift all that soil, and then you get down to using like spades, and then it's like trowels, and then it's like a brush, and you're brushing off. And and I think this is what is amazing about yoga, is it's kind of, you can really get those bulldozers and those diggers to, for people who don't move, which was where me leaving A&E became yoga. And then yoga's led me to you, because yoga couldn't fix my problems. Like, I still had knee discomfort, and now I understand why it's there, because of this. But so when I say bashing yoga, I just I like to bash yoga, because there's some terrible ideas around in yoga. But
we should also say, and I'm openly admit to this, just to being an absolute purist in the realm of anatomy, so I know that it's not for everyone. But I know that those who choose to take it on will get the benefits and reap their rewards, and that's why I'll continue it, really. Of course I want people to come and join us in the learning and be able to improve their bodies and teach other people to do the same, but I'm not here to drag everybody along with me. I think in the same way that we take ownership of our bodies, we want you to take ownership of your learning and your education, and if we can be a part of that, then that's amazing. That's definitely kind of how I like to roll.
Nice. So I guess just briefly before we finish, we can do all that normal standard post podcast thing of where do people find you and all that kind of shit.
So I'll give you the Instagram, is probably my favorite platform, at Gary Ward _AIM. We are on Facebook as well, Facebook.com/Anatomy in Motion, and our website is www.findingcentre, spelled the English way, CENTRE.co.uk, and pretty much everything will be
okay. So that's where in there. I'm going to put that in the bottom anyway, but that'll be where, like, for you guys who want to go and find the wake up your body, wake up your feet, that's where if you want to go and find, obviously you should be coming to see me because you're listening to my podcast, but if you wanted to go and find another practitioner, there's also a whole link on the website about people you can find.
In your local area, wherever you are, hopefully.
Well, exactly. I mean, we're now doing Zoom, so you could still see me, but still. But yeah, and then finally, obviously, you've got your book, What the Foot, which I'll put in as well, which is well worth, I think, for anatomy people, like movement people, whatever, it's well worth a read. But even normal go-to, like day-to-day people can get so much out of it. Finally, I know, like, I hate to like bring it up because it's still in the work, but but obviously you've been posting a few bits about some of the pictures recently from your new book, which is hopefully coming out sometime in the future.
It will come out. It
will come out at some point. Which will be? Is it going to will it be called Flow Motion Model, or have you kind of got a name for it yet?
Essentially, it's going to be a book all about the flow motion model to document that journey we talked about earlier of every single bone in all its 3 dimensions, and be a reference tool for anatomy and gait, hopefully. So
I can definitely recommend going and look at Gary's Instagram and just checking out some of the pictures which are being used, because they are freaking amazing.
Well, Rob, this is part of the problem, is that the artwork for the book is an observation of every bone and joint and connected joints and structures, some with bits like taken away, so you can look at the front of a talus bone, or and so everything is covered from all angles. So even a foot is from the base, from the top, from the left, from the right, from the front, from the back, and add that to every single one. So the artwork has been 3 years in the process, and we are getting close to a place of we've probably got everything. And so I feel like we're getting closer, but it's when I got to the point of What the Foot being finished, it was another 2 years. So I'm not mad keen to
put a date on anything.
Date on anything. And certainly when I started writing it 5 years ago, I didn't expect to still be sat here answering these questions, because it's been 5 years of people asking me that question.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't looking for a date of when it was coming out. It was more just like a heads up for people to definitely go and check out the artwork, because it's, as far as understanding a foot, it's pretty pretty incredible.
There's hopefully something else as well in the pipeline, and also new online education installments as well for people to look forward to who've been working on the closed chain biomechanics of the lower limb. We'll be moving into upper body, and then fingers crossed a third program that will start to pull it together before we get into the actual flow motion model side of the education as well.
Which again, I mean, I've done the lower body and it's amazing. And so I honestly, if you are a movement practitioner, go and check it out, because you'll get a lot out of it for whatever it is your movement thing is. So yeah,
thank you.
Sweet. All right, mate. Well, thanks for coming and joining me.
It's been a pleasure. Very enjoyable.
I'll sit.